today I have the pleasure of speaking with a truly inspiring guest who has transformed his life and now dedicates his time to helping others do the same. My guest, Joshua Peters, is a high-performance coach, certified hypnotist, and expert in personal development. With a diverse background that spans corporate leadership and creative design, Joshua has a unique perspective on overcoming challenges related to focus and motivation. Despite a successful career, Joshua faced significant internal struggles that led him to explore and eventually embrace hypnosis as a tool for profound personal change. Today, he uses his expertise to guide others in releasing limiting beliefs, overcoming self-sabotage, and unlocking their true potential. Through his work, Joshua has helped countless individuals discover their X factor and live a more fulfilling life. In today's episode, we're going to delve into Joshua's journey, explore the power of hypnosis, discuss the concepts of trance states, shadow work. We'll also learn about the neuroscience behind personal transformation and gain insights into how we can all take control of our lives and thrive. I want to give you a very warm welcome, Joshua, to the Transcendent Minds podcast.
Thank you so much, Peter. That's quite the introduction. I really am excited to be here to chat with you today.
You started your career in the corporate world. You engaged in various roles from freelance graphic design to leading teams in large organizations. And you had this successful exterior, but you struggled internally with focus and motivation. And this internal conflict led you to procrastinate and feel frustrated with yourself. Then came a turning point where you decided to confront these challenges head on, which led you to discover and harness the power of hypnosis as a tool for personal and profound transformation. Today, as a high-performance coach and certified hypnotist, you help others to liberate their genius, their potential and possibilities by overcoming self-limiting beliefs. My first question to you, Joshua, is what was the pivotal moment, or was there a rising realization that made you realize you needed to make a change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I spent the first part of my life, my 20s and my early 30s. I don't want to say floundering through life, but it felt like that in hindsight. I was making choices by just not making choices, basically letting life lead me around or let other people make choices for me. I was 33, I believe, and the pivotal moment for me was this moment where my wife had told me she was basically done with our relationship. And it hit me in such a powerful way that I had spent a lot of time really trying to make this happen and make this life that we were building together work. Had 5 kids. I was in this place, though, that I didn't really want to be. I didn't want to live in my hometown that I grew up in. I never wanted to go back there, but I spent 20 years there. I was working in a job that I thought was going to be my dream job, but it was eating away at my soul. And this relationship, it had been over for years. I had essentially refused to see that and to let it run its course. So she told me that, and I didn't know what to do. My sister suggested I go take this workshop. I didn't know really much about this workshop that I was taking. I didn't know what else to do, so I trusted her. The workshop that I took was the Landmark Forum. So I don't know if you know what the Landmark Forum is, but a lot of people have, over a weekend, you get to this place where you're ready to hear some things that maybe you've heard before, but you hadn't heard them at the level that you did. The thing that I got from the Landmark Forum was there is no meaning to life except for the meaning that we give to it. And we get to choose what that meaning is. That hit me in such a way that I decided to start making meaning, to start deciding how I wanted my life to be, instead of letting it float me this way and that way. And I started making choices. I quit smoking. I got a job that was in alignment with my values and closer to my home. I started getting involved with the community. I got divorced. I started doing all these things. And along the way, I started to explore things I was curious about and interested in. One of those side shoots was sideshow arts, like fire eating and laying on a bed of nails and walking on broken glass. I got really interested in this and found myself a mentor, learned these skills, and then I built a show, an outdoor festival show for families that was a comedy sideshow act. I toured it for about 10 years. But the point of this is it's all cool and stuff that I can blow fire and all that stuff. In hindsight, as I look back at this, what I was doing was training myself to push through fear. The reason that I had stayed in that relationship and in that life for so long was I had very low self-esteem. I didn't think I'd find anybody else. I didn't think I could do anything. I had low confidence in myself, and I had a lot of fear around even putting myself out there. That fear held me back. As I was doing this performing, and I have to learn how to reach out to different festivals, and then I'm out there and I'm on the stage and I'm doing all these things that are training my body to manage that level of fear so that it's not fear anymore. The other thing is, all of these sideshow acts, it's not hard to lay on a bed of nails because there's science to it. There's so many nails that no one nail takes all of your weight. It's distributed across all the nails. It's not like it's comfortable, but it's not like it's super painful either. The trick is you have to get past your own mind, because our mind is saying, you can't lay on a bunch of nails. That's stupid. Or same thing with walking on broken glass or eating fire, any of those things. If you know the ways, the techniques of doing these things, they're pretty simple to do, except that our brain, our mind gets in the way. So I was training myself to move past this fear. All this time, I was working in an organic food company, trying to help organic farmers grow. So I loved the vision. I felt like I was doing something good for the world, but it was corporate life, and it still has all the politics that corporate life has. I was tired of it. After about 10 years in this, as I was pushing myself and growing, I had met someone that I wanted to explore a relationship with. And she didn't live near me. She lived in the Twin Cities, about a 4-hour drive from me. I wanted to move and still had 2 kids in high school. They did not want to move with me. But I also knew this is something I need to do. And I'm going to regret not doing this more than I'm going to regret doing this. I instinctually knew that. Being a dad is important to me, and being there for my kids was important to me. I had the family home. I was the rock of the family. And my ex and I, we had a good relationship and everything, but I was the one that they always knew they could count on if they needed to. So to take that away from them felt really hard. I ran across a hypnotist. She helped me shift my mindset around this and to realize there's other things that I can do. I can make this work if I put my mind to it. So that's what I did. I figured out a way to make it work, and I moved and everything was working. And I started to decide what I wanted to really do when I grow up. Hypnosis showed up again. I think it was an ad, probably on Facebook or something like that, showed up for me. And I met a hypnotist. I really resonated with him. And I realized if I could help other people move past their fears, like get past the stuff that took me like literally 10 plus years to do, but I could help them do that quicker, I could make a living doing this. I couldn't think of a more empowering way to live my life. So I did it. I signed up with him. I learned the process. I mentored with him for about a year. At the end of that time, I started working with coworkers, friends, with family members, anybody who would sit down with me and play, I'd work with them. After about a year and a half of seeing clients on evenings and weekends, I was able to go full time. So in September 2018, I went full time. That was also the time when my youngest daughter graduated. And so it was just like a cutoff. Boom, I shifted everything over. I've been doing it full time since September 2018.
Your story highlights a significant personal transformation. Growth happens at the threshold of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
It's much easier to stay in that relationship and stay within that discomfort rather than face the reality of the truth of the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
So you tolerate one aspect of it, which isn't really serving you. In another way, it keeps pricking your conscience to say, hey, you need to grow. Hey, you need to change where you live, what you're doing, who you're with. This keeps tapping and keeps tapping at you. If you don't respond to that tap, it starts to slap you. So
Yeah.
you get
Oh,
hit
yeah.
by that cosmic 2x4 and it says,
That's
hey, Joshua, wake up. There's a whole new life for you.
Peter, that is funny because that's exactly how I think about it. During my 20s and early 30s, that's exactly what was happening. There were moments where the universe is like, hey, time to make some choices here. This is not your path. My wife was sitting me down and telling me that. This is the cosmic 2x4. This is that 2x4 to the side of the head that's like, all right, you didn't listen. I gave
Yeah.
you lots of nudges. So here, now you're going to have to listen. There's no options.
That takes a lot of courage and resilience. There's always going to be this little person sitting on your shoulder, whispering these negative things into your ear and making toxic vibrations in your mind. If you keep responding to that, it keeps you shackled. You have one foot nailed to the floor and you just keep going around in circles. The thing with history or any personal history, if we don't look at what is shaping our agency, then it repeats itself in trodden roots. We can see this in the broader aspects of
Yeah.
our society. It's great that you put in that interruptus and you had the courage. There's always events that when you put yourself out there, events conspire for you to grow because growth is one of the proponents of being human. And that's in nature, that's in everything. But if you go against the generic patterns of growth, you're either going to become totally paralyzed and not do anything with it, or you're going to take it on board and say, okay, I know I need to go into the rough and tumble of this whole arena of change. Once you make that intention and you put your attention on it, then things
Mm-hmm.
start happening. All
Yeah.
these synchronicities start happening. Hey, maybe this is what I'm meant to be doing. And here you are, you've emerged.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, hypnosis, let's talk about this because I want you to debunk hypnosis because it's often misunderstood because so many people associate it with a sleep or loss of control or a stage act. When I spoke to you last time, you clarified to me that it's a natural state of mind, similar to daydreaming or getting absorbed in a book. Through your work, I know you help clients use this state to release negative habits and beliefs, and you've helped facilitate profound personal transformation. Can you explain what hypnosis is and how it differs from common misconceptions?
I'll use the word hypnosis a lot because, as you say, everyone has, or most people have some type of knowledge around that word, and it has a meaning to it, it has a charge to it. But as you say, almost everyone has these misconceptions, misunderstandings about what it actually is. They're almost always completely wrong about what they think it really is. I think of it more like this is a trance state. If we remove the word hypnosis, let's just put in the word trance. What I help people do is find a positive trance state. When you're in a state of fear or anxiety or any of these things, you are literally in a non-resourceful trance. You go into this automatic response, whether it's a fight or flight response or something different. You're going into this automatic response. You're not really making choices at that point. You're just doing the thing that you do. That's a form of a trance. Another form, as you already described, is getting lost in a book, driving and totally in your mind and losing your exit, or a daydream kind of a state. That meditative state is a form of a trance. Even doing a workout can be a form of a trance, where any time you're doing something repetitive like that, listening to music, all of these are great ways to alter your state, get into a different state of consciousness, which is a trance state. With hypnosis, what we do is we take you into a trance state and help you shift how your mind is thinking. We probably talked about this before, but there's neuroscience behind how this works. I always like to throw that in there just because it helps people get a better understanding of what we're really doing here. Because we can talk about trance states, we can talk about altered states. I don't even need to take you into a place where you're feeling something different because you have access to those states all the time. You can usually get it to it just by closing your eyes. But from the neuroscience point of view, what we do is we activate the problem state. And this is tied to a pathway in the brain. When we go through life, things happen to us. Emotional experiences occur, especially when we're young. When those emotional experiences occur, they can be intense. When the brain is watching for those, because if it's an emotional experience, it knows this is important. So something highly emotional happens, and maybe it's a little scary. We react by doing something. And if we survive, meaning we didn't die, the brain goes, hey, that strategy was successful. It's going to store that. Remember, it's the emotional experience is what the brain uses to know if something is important or not. You get through it, the brain records, this is the strategy we use to get through this type of experience. As you go through life, another similar experience happens. The brain goes, hey, we used this one strategy before and that worked. So let's try that again. It works, meaning I'm not dead. That's all that it cares about is if I'm not dead. And great, that worked again. Perfect. Now we're starting to strengthen this pathway because it's working. This might be just like a feeling of anxiety, right? So you might be in a situation that feels scary. Anxiety comes up, and that means you get away from it. Now the feeling is gone. Success. When you're in a scary situation, that anxiety comes up, you move away from it. Success. This is called neuroplasticity. This is how the brain strengthens pathways that are getting used. It's how we learn things. We use neuroplasticity all the time. It's also the way that we forget things because the other side of neuroplasticity is weakening the pathways that are not getting used. So we strengthen the ones that are getting used, we weaken the ones that are not getting used. Over time, call it the anxiety pathway, gets really strong to the point where it becomes like a super highway. This is where people have a problem, right? This is me in that fear that I had back in the day. I'm not good enough. I'm not confident. I don't think that I matter. Like all these things are all tied to this pathway that was created probably when I was just 3 years old. Something happens, we start acting out the wisdom of a 3-year-old, and we might do that for the rest of our lives without even really thinking about it. That's the background. The way hypnosis works is we're going to activate this pathway. We usually do that by talking about the problem just a little bit. By doing that, we start to activate it. So this is what happens often in talk therapy. Go to a talk therapist, and nothing against talk therapy. Some of my clients tell me that they're tired of therapy because they go to the therapist, they talk about their problem, and when they leave, they feel worse than when they got there. The science behind that is because when they're talking about their problem, they're literally lighting up the problem pathway. They're literally strengthening the problem because all they've done is talk about it. So if you just talk about it and then walk out the door, you've strengthened that pathway, made it stronger. With hypnosis, what we're going to do is talk about it just enough to activate it. Then we're going to use these trance states and different techniques, hypnotic techniques, to send neurons down a different path, usually of calm, confidence, peace of mind, that sort of thing. We do that again and again, using neuroplasticity to strengthen the pathway that you want now. If we strengthen this pathway that we want, the old one starts to get weaker because, again, neuroplasticity, strengthen the pathways you're using, weaken the ones you're not using. That's the neuroscience behind this. It helps when you're in a situation where you need this. The path is already there. Your brain already knows what to do because you've rehearsed it in your mind. And the brain doesn't know the difference between imagining something happening and something actually happening. The same things are going on. You're strengthening that pathway either way. So that's essentially what I do as a hypnotist and a change worker. There's a lot of subtleties inside of that I haven't really
Sure.
talked about, but that's from a high level. That's what hypnosis does. And that's really what any kind of change work is doing. Light up the problem pathway, send the neurons down the new pathway. That's it.
And it goes back to an old physiological axiom of use it or lose it. If you're going to the gym and you want to build muscle, you've got to have the amount of resistance, the right amount of overload for you to get a training effect. If you don't do that on a consistent basis, it's not going to happen. When you have these emotions, say anxiety, that's like saying, check the engine light on your car. If you disable it, you're missing a crucial signal
Hmm.
because your brain is wired for survival, not happiness. Like a panic attack is not an attack, it's your brain trying to communicate with you. And so if we have this emotional leprosy and we don't respond to these things, because all of these different emotions are saying, hey, you've got a lack of resources. We want to give you this signal to get some deeper understanding. We don't always know what the source is, but it has a source, even if it's not immediately apparent. It's not the fact that anybody is crazy, but if you're going to look at something like anxiety or having psychological safety or dealing with anger, you have to remember that you're on a journey of self discovery and healing. That's what you're embarking on. What are the essential components that make a trance like state effective?
This isn't always true, but for most people, it feels very relaxing to go into that trance state. So what I'll typically do is I'm going to just guide you with my words to ultimately to get present. So a lot of this is learning to be present with where you are, with your body, with what is happening, with your breathing. As you start to get present with your breath, with how you're feeling, that drops you out of what's called a beta brainwave. That's what we spend most of our time in. Starts to take you down into an alpha state or even into theta, below the alpha. So that's where we're looking for, is somewhere in there. You've probably heard of NLP. So NLP is a form of hypnosis that's very conversational. You can have just as great of results using conversational hypnosis as you can taking somebody into a deep trance. So the trance is not even really necessary, but most people like it. They expect it. It's part of what I typically do with people. I'm going to take you in just with my words, helping guide you into a place where you feel relaxed, where you feel calm. Sometimes people haven't felt that for quite a while, so that's a resource state for them. Then we'll use imaginative exercises typically to shift belief patterns, to heal old experiences, to release the charge from a memory that's still affecting you, or to get some insights from your deeper mind or from that future you, which is really your deeper mind. There's lots of ways that we do this, but we're connecting with these different aspects of us. Pretty much know the answers. I don't give people answers. I can guide you to a place where you can get the answers that you need. If I was just going to tell you what to do, have you ever seen that Bob Newhart skit where he just says, stop it?
Yeah.
Right? Like ultimately, that's basically what would make the most sense, but it just doesn't work. So you got to find the answers yourself. You don't need somebody to tell you to just stop it. You need to find what you need to understand about the situation or about yourself, or give yourself the love that you need or the appreciation that you need, and realize that you're worthy for no other reason than the fact that you're a human being living here on this planet.
When a person has the insight themselves, that indelibly encodes and engraves their neurology. You could tell somebody till you're blue in the face,
Yeah.
but if that doesn't land for them, they may take it on board and go, oh, yeah, that's really great. It's a bit like going to some of these, what I call motivational hell seminars, where we hurrah,
Yeah.
sign up here and yes. And then you get the manual and you get all the paperwork and all this fancy stuff. You think it's going to be self-development, but it becomes shelf-development because you
Yeah.
don't do anything with
Absolutely.
it, because you're out of that radiation, you're out of the environment that supports that particular state. And there's a difference between the state and stages of
Yes.
development. As an example, when we talk about trance, I remember some years ago, I was at a client's house and their kids were on the floor, lying down, watching TV. And mom was going, hey, kids, it's supper time. They're, they're totally
Totally in.
glued to the TV set. And she's saying this a few times. And then they wake up when she raised the volume of her voice. But you can see how it hypnotizes you.
Yeah, for sure.
It draws you in. There's all kinds of examples, and you emphasize the importance of understanding the neuroscience behind it, which is great. And I know there's a lot more to it. In terms of the concept of shadow work, because that involves exploring and integrating the unconscious parts of ourselves. That helps individuals break free from limiting beliefs and behaviors and self-sabotage and promotes overall well-being. Can you delve into what it entails and why it's crucial in personal development?
So, shadow work is all these things that we're talking about. When you are integrating that part of us that we've hidden from ourselves, this is the part that we rejected. When it's been rejected, it's like it splits off. It can be communicating with a younger part of you. It can be communicating with your unconscious mind. There's lots of ways that we can do this. All of the healing we're doing is shadow work because we are integrating these problems. That's the same thing as firing off those neurons and sending them down a different path. It's just a different way of looking at it. It's important to own it, to integrate this. A lot of people will come in. You've probably heard of family parts therapy, I think it's called, where your
It's,
internal family systems,
yeah.
right? There's hypnotic processes that are similar to that, where you're dealing with different aspects of yourself or different parts of yourself. A lot of times when I'm working with a client and we're doing that sort of thing, their initial thing that they want to do when they're coming up to this part of them that's responsible for their anxiety is they're like, I want you to leave. I'm done with you. Just go. But the problem is that these shadow parts, the parts of us that we don't look at, they actually have a job. And usually that's around keeping us safe, making sure that we have what we need in some way. It's not holistic to eliminate them. They're a part of us. They literally deserve the same love that all the rest of our parts deserve. So shadow work is about giving these parts what they need and accepting them back in so that they become part of you. So they're no longer in the shadow. The thing about the shadow is when you shine a light on it, there's no shadow there anymore. It's only a shadow when you don't look at it. So this is about really becoming whole. That's what shadow work is ultimately about. That's what we all are looking for, is to become our whole best self. Usually that's what you're trying to do when you're doing personal development, is be your whole best self.
2,000 years ago, Saul of Tarsus, later known as Paul, I had to write down this quote. He poignantly describes the internal struggle that we often face. And he says, I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. When I saw that, I thought, wow, that ancient wisdom still resonates today because it highlights the tension between our intentions and our actions. It's like you have one foot pressed down on the gas, which is your good intentions, but you have the other foot slammed on the brake, embodying the actions that oppose those intentions. That
Yeah.
internal conflict is exhausting because it leaves us revving our engines but getting nowhere. If you're brave enough to admit that you're circling the drain in some aspect of your life, then it's time to pull down the kabuki screen of your life and reveal the stagnant gunk that holds you back. I don't see shadow work as offering sweet swills of snake oil. It's embracing effective and life-changing psychological medicine.
Yeah.
At its core, this work addresses the evolving tension between our drive to self-protect and our drive to self-transform. So there's this
Absolutely.
dance between defense and possibility, which essentially is the act of hope itself. Many people find themselves stuck and they're unable to bridge the gap between knowing what to do and doing it. But the stagnation is not a reflection of laziness or weakness. It's not like you're crazy, dumb, or broken. It's not a motivation problem either. I think it's much deeper than that because it's also a physical process. These are the responses from our bodies trying to tell us something. It's like you're in the driver's seat of your brain. But in an emotional mode, it's like you're locked in the trunk of a speeding car with no brakes, right?
Yeah,
And like you
absolutely.
were saying, it's a collection of parts and subparts. So we have the power to change how we think and act, provided we have the choices and the willingness, the resources to do. And I think there were, if I wrote them down here, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Stephen Porges. Dr. Peter Levine. They've all contributed significantly to understanding how mental health requires body awareness. And Van der Kolk, I think that's the way you pronounce it, said the past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. We become exploring our gut feelings and numbing awareness of what is played outside because they learn to hide from themselves. There's a huge aspect to this in terms of the neuroscience, looking at shadow work, as you explained. And in your experience, what are some common shadows people face? And how does facilitating a trance state help in addressing them?
It can be a lot of different ways. I'll use an example of two clients I recently worked with. One of them, the reason I was working with him was he had this incredible fear of flying. We had done lots of different techniques to help him move through that, and he was still having some issues. I've had him close his eyes, go into that trance state, and we worked together for a while. The thing to remember about it, this is a skill that you learn. As I'm working with a client, essentially teaching them how to utilize this state and how to go into the state themselves. By the time I'm done working with the client, they can usually go into a trance state pretty quickly. I had him close his eyes and take a few breaths. Imagine himself sitting at a table, him on one end, the part responsible for that fear on the other end. They started to have a conversation. As they have this conversation, they're starting to, just like I said, he's like, go away. But the thing is there for a reason. And they start to have a true conversation. At first, it's like this, it's a fight, but eventually it becomes more like a collaboration to the point where they come together, they hug each other, they literally come together, merge back together again. I worked with a client yesterday for something else. We did a similar kind of process where he sat down, had this conversation with his other part, and they got clarity on what was really going on, like what this thing needed, what it needed from him, what he wanted from it, and how it could get the thing it wanted with a different strategy that was resourceful instead of non-resourceful. At the end, I asked him, what do you want to do with that part now? I want to give him a hug. So they gave each other a hug and again, come together. So a lot of times that's what this is about, is this part of you that's responsible for the thing that's been your problem. Usually it's trying to help you. It just has a really messed up strategy on how to help because it's based on a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, like somebody very young who didn't know what life was like, who didn't understand what was happening and made something up about what was happening so that they could get through the situation. But now you have this part of you that thinks it's in charge, thinks it's got to keep doing this. So I see this for lots of things. A lot of times the part is there. It's almost always to keep you safe. But like I said, it does it in a messed up strategy that's actually holding you back. It's almost always doing the opposite of what it wants for you.
The distinction I would make is between measurement and interpretation. The 3, 4, 5, 6 year old, 7-year old child may be able to measure what is happening, but they may not be able to give it interpretation because their prefrontal cortex is not formed.
Yeah.
That then encodes their neurology, which they carry that child into adulthood. It's a child living in an adult's body. The outplay of that can manifest in so many different ways where they may not even understand because no one's actually been able to, I'm not saying to relive their past, but as you said, to light it up, to put light on it, to light up that bit of their darkness so that psychic residue can then become disarmed. Then you can superimpose it with new language and new thought processes and new impressions.
Then you can carry those new impressions forward all the way through all the different moments of your life. But with this new learning, that's the rewiring. That's changing how you feel in your brain. That's literally lighting up this new pathway in lots of different ways.
First, you have to recognize,
Yeah.
and you need to be able to reflect on what has happened. I'm not talking about navel gazing, but to be able to look at it, and this is the lighting up, then you can start to rebuild and reset and rewire.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point. One of the very first things that I will do with most people is I will give them some tools on how to interrupt that fight or flight response. Almost always what's happening is a trigger moment happens and it boom, it flips you right into this automatic defensive fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. All of a sudden, you've got chemicals flowing through you, hormones are there. You are no longer reacting from this fear place, trying to make sure that the saber-toothed tiger doesn't get you. Obviously, there's no saber-toothed tiger, and there's probably really nothing to really be afraid about. Again, this was me back in those early days. When you're stuck in that, then it's really hard to do the reflection. It's really hard to shift the way you're thinking. So the first thing we need to do is, what are some ways that you can either stop that from happening or bring your brain waves down when that is happening so you can come to a more resourceful place, and now you can move forward from there.
In the times that we're living in the 21st century, how important is shadow work?
It depends on what your goals are. You can certainly go through life and never do any kind of personal development, and
Mm.
plenty of people do that. But in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, if you want to live life to its fullest and know yourself as best as you can, you need to explore those parts of you because they are parts of you. These are actually really important parts of you that if you don't explore them, you don't feel good about yourself, or that's the I'm not good enough stuff that comes up for people, or that's the part of us that we're trying to prove something. So we maybe overextend ourselves. And we could talk about people in the world that do this, but I'm not going to even go there because there's no need to, because we all know exactly who we're talking about when we think about people that are like that. We probably have people in our lives that are like that. They don't reflect and they just are reacting all the time. That reaction, as your life goes on, it gets more cemented if you don't ever do any work, again, because you're just letting that pathway. This is what I do. This is just who I am. The truth is, we are not anything. We aren't born with a set of personality traits. Like, these things happen to us, and we can always grow. We can always change. It's just a matter of will, if you want it or not. Personally, I love growth. I love the challenge of it. It's hard sometimes. There's a lot of conflict comes up internally, and you got to confront these different beliefs about yourself or a life that probably aren't even true, but we think they are, like rules that we make up about life, and question them so that you can consciously now choose what you want your life to be like. Otherwise, you're just what I was doing. You're just letting life lead you around.
It's having the overall ability to be self-directed, to organize and propel your life in such a way that has a compatibility of alignment with your soul, with your energy, and with the essence of who and what you're becoming. I see many people, and this isn't a judgment, it's an observation, who are stuck like a fence post, where they're not actually moving anywhere. There's huge importance for shadow work, especially today. This is not to indoctrinate or bring about a dogmatic approach of you must do this. The more I think about it is when we look at the 21st century, it's characterized by rapid technological advancement and constant connectivity. But I think there's a lot of disconnectivity.
Yeah.
We may be wired together, but we're not connected necessarily.
Right.
It leads to overstimulation and distraction, especially with the blue light that we get from our devices. I think shadow work can help people to cut through the noise by fostering a deeper self-awareness and understanding. Trance-like states coming to the work that you're doing will enable them to make intentional choices in a world of external influences, because regressed emotions and unresolved psychological conflicts all contribute to anxiety and depression and all these other issues. But I see shadow work promotes mental health, or I prefer to say mental well-being,
Mm-hmm.
by encouraging a person to confront and process these emotions in a healthy manner. That delves also into relationships, because you have a lot of people who are in interpersonal conflicts, and they tend to arise from unacknowledged personal issues that are
Yeah.
projected onto others. When we recognize and integrate these shadow aspects, we can improve our relationships by becoming more empathetic and less judgmental and better able to communicate. As you were saying earlier, you can carry those new codings, if you will, you have the ability to recognize and address your weaknesses, because that's a critical component of your personal development and professional development, especially in these competitive markets where individuals who are engaging in shadow work are better equipped to handle criticism, adapt to change, build resilience, and leverage their strengths. So I think there's a whole practical application by doing trance work, from coming to see you, getting that kind of work done, to
Mhm.
self-reflection, to journaling, to writing, to mindfulness meditation, all these
Yes,
things. Lots of
yes.
ways to do it. There's also inner dialogue and active imagination when we engage in a dialogue, which involves having that conversation with different parts of ourselves,
Yeah.
including the shadow, which is what I see you're doing in a sense, is you facilitate that environment where they can start to engage in a dialogue and have that mental and emotional conversation with the different parts of themselves, including the shadow.
Mhm.
And that way that it can help them negotiate and reconcile different aspects of those parts.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that you've basically understood this very well. The only other piece I'll throw out there around trance work, and you mentioned some different ways to do that. Hypnosis is a trance, meditation. You can get to a beautiful trance through breath work. Psychedelics can take you into a trance. We can get into amazing trance places, even in powerful sexual experiences. So lots of ways that you can find this state, whether it is using hypnosis or using music or meditation or breath work or sexuality. Like all of these things are ways to take you into an altered state, a trance state. And when you go into that kind of a state, it increases the connections in the brain. It increases that neuroplasticity, makes it easier for different aspects of our brain to start making connections so that we can think differently, so we can change the way that we're feeling. So rewiring the brain. And you don't necessarily need a trance state to do that, but it makes it a little bit easier to do that.
What advice would you give to someone who's listening to this and feels stuck or overwhelmed or unsure of how to take the first step towards change?
Some things that you can do, and this is going to sound a little silly, but we get really stuck in patterns. If you're stuck in a fear or a block like I was back then, you can do some really simple things to start to shift things around. That can be brushing your teeth with your opposite hand that you normally brush your teeth with. Noticing, oh, I put my left shoe on first every day. So put your right shoe on first. Take a different route home from work or visit a different spot. Start doing different things. Those little changes can spark and create the flexibility to start making bigger changes. There are some simple ways of doing breath work. There's lots of breath work out there that's really helpful to shift that state, to change the way you're feeling when you're in that response. So that's another thing that you can do. A simple one is called the connected breath. There's a lot of information on the Heart Math Institute on this, but connected breath, it's essentially a 5 or 6 second inhale and then the same amount of an exhale. There's no hold at the top, there's no hold at the bottom. It's just this continuous, that's why I call it connected breath. The inhale and the exhale are connected. When you breathe at that rate, around 6 breaths a minute, this is the ideal rate of the human body to breathe. When we're breathing in that rate, it puts our body into what they're calling a coherent state, the ideal state for the body mind to function at its best. Even simpler, if you just practice belly breathing. If you are somebody who's in a fear response a lot, notice how you breathe. You're almost certainly breathing in the top of your chest. This is an anxiety kind of breath, but it's also something that we in the Western world have trained ourselves to do because we're sucking our gut in, trying to look skinny. Even if you're not feeling anxious, if you only breathe up here, you're still breathing like you are anxious. And it's confusing the body and the mind because the message is, oh, I'm anxious because I'm breathing like this. You're also getting less oxygen in your body. So you start to get into this constant desaturation of oxygen and you're not functioning at your best. If all you do is focus on filling your belly with air first. You can still breathe up here, but fill the belly first. That is going to start to activate the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve connects the brain to the heart and down to the gut and all of the organs. It's the communicator part of our nervous system. When you activate the vagus nerve, that takes us from fight or flight to rest and digest. Parasympathetic nervous system. Simplest one is just focus on breathing out of your belly, activate that vagus nerve, calm your mind, do the connected breath if you want to, throw them together, do the connected breath and focus on your belly breathing.
There's so much science now that backs up what you're talking about. I love breath work. It's free. It's a
Yeah.
unique tool.
Yeah.
And it's one of those physiological functions that is both automatic and consciously controllable.
What happens is when the automatic is that our body does these types of breathing when we're in situations like sleeping, we go into this more shallow, deeper breath. Anxiety or fear, we breathe up here. There's these different things that automatically happen. We forget that we can change that. This is a big thing that is really important. But a lot of times people think that when they're feeling a certain emotion, they have to go into it. They have to fully experience it. Like, I'm afraid. What's that like? Oh, notice all the ways that I'm feeling afraid. I wonder if I'll feel afraid over in this situation. It's going to feel like this. You're focusing on the thing that you don't want and you're building up that pathway, and it's going to be harder to feel fear. I was telling you about the fear of flying client, had gone on a flight. This was my first time I saw him since he came back. The first thing he said was, didn't work at all. Then I started asking him some questions, and I found out that it actually did work. He ended up taking some medication on the flight, but only after he had been through the flight for a while. And he took half the medication that he normally would take, and it was actually a lot better. But he was focused on, he was looking for the fear. He was trying to find, how much fear am I feeling right now, instead of how much more comfort am I feeling right now. You're going to find whatever you look for. If you spend all of your time looking for your anxiety, looking for your fear, or whatever it is that you don't want, you're going to get more of that. If you instead look for, even in a place of fear, how much calm do I have here? And it might just be a tiny little bit, but that's okay. Find the thing you want. Focus on the thing you want. Notice which part of your body is relaxed in this moment and focus on that part, because as you focus on it, it's going to grow. Same thing around that flight. If he would have focused on how much more comfortable am I feeling than normal, that would have gone a long ways towards him finding the success that he was having.
What you focus on expands. Many people focus on the what's wrong mindset, or what
Yeah.
I call the hell mindset,
Right.
rather than the what works mindset, which is the
Yeah.
heaven mindset. It goes from what can I get, which is an example of a hell mindset, rather than the heaven mindset will be what can I do? How can I contribute? Many people are focused on that. There's this whole thing with breath work, the whole dual nature of it makes it a very unique and powerful tool for regulating the body's stress response and emotional state. The work that I do with breath work, my own personal practice, is that it alters my breathing patterns and it influences my mental and physical state, and it enhances my ability to respond, not react, to
Yeah.
respond to life's
Yeah.
challenges with much greater resilience and calmness, almost like a detachment. It's such a versatile and accessible practice that offers so many benefits for physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional health. When we start to understand or stand under and utilize these different breathing techniques, because in effect, it's a pattern interrupter. So we're interrupting that upper
Yeah.
thorax breathing. Then we can manage stress and improve emotional regulation. Dr. Porges calls it improving vagal tone. So whether we integrate it into daily routines or use it in specific situations or practice it over a broader wellness strategy, what
Mhm.
I found is there's an empowerment to breath work. And the empowerment is it helps me take control of my
Yeah.
health and my emotional state.
I was telling you about the tools that I teach people. That's one of the biggest things is when somebody has now something they can do when they're in a fearful, anxiety, whatever kind of situation, that can go a long way. When you have something that you can do now to shift how you're feeling in a moment, that can be incredibly empowering for people.
Mm.
And sometimes that's the biggest shift for them is now they have a tool where before they didn't have anything and they thought they had to go through the moment.
That tool needs to become part of their ecology of practices. It becomes a consistent action that they make in their life. One of the things with tools is the tool shed analogy, where they go to their shed in the backyard, they pick up a tool, they use it, and they put it back and forget about it. Now, I'm not saying you've got to be present every day with it, but if you build it into a practice as you embrace it, because if you do that, it becomes part of your basic constitution. Then
Mhm.
you can expand and extend it because you're enacting it every single day. When you look back on your journey, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned and aligned to about personal development and resilience?
I think the daily practice is a key for me. And I don't always do this now, but especially when I was in the thick of kind of making changes in my life, a daily meditation practice went a long way in helping me get to that more resilient state, like you were talking about. For me, and this is different for everybody, but for me, my way of learning and getting into life is to do things. I have to actually try something to learn if I like it or not. I joke about this with my wife, and she's very strategic, very brilliant thinker. Her method is I'll tell my method first is ready, fire, aim, adjust, aim, fire again. That's my method. Her method is ready, aim, get it just right before finally she'll fire. Everybody's a little different. For me, I like to take action. I like to do things. I like to make mistakes and learn from them. I think that right there is a big key for success in any area of life is knowing you're not going to be perfect. This is a process, not a piece of art that has to be beautiful from the moment that it's created. Like you are learning how to do things. You're going to get better at it as you go. You're going to make mistakes and learn from them. And that's great. That's how we learn.
Mm.
That's how SpaceX has become such a powerhouse because they threw the rocket ships up and blew them up and learned from that and then did it again and did it again. Pretty soon, it's so unbelievable. You're landing rockets vertically back where they launched from. That's science fiction. By constantly learning from mistakes, that's how you get better. There's what's called a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? So fixed mindset is I'm born a certain way. This is just who I am. Growth mindset, I can learn, I can grow, I can always become better. It's a matter of effort. Those two things are in conflict, but the reality is it is about the effort. It isn't about the result. It's about the effort you put into getting where you want to go.
Mm. The fixed mindset is a reinforcement, and the growth mindset is a reshape. Most people get stuck is having one foot nailed to the floor, going around in circles, thinking they're
Yeah.
getting somewhere, but they're actually getting nowhere. I've enjoyed this conversation with you. Where can people find you? And do you have any parting words at all?
Sure. My main website is xfactorhypnosis.com. And I do have a podcast. There's links to the podcast there. There's all kinds of stuff. All my social media is there. So reach out. I like to engage with people, and I'm pretty much an open book. I've got a gift for your listeners as well. It's a transformational program that takes you through moving past a fear or a worry or an anxiety or something that's blocking you in 7 days or less using some emails and using some recordings along the way. I know everybody who comes in, I'm watching them go through it. This is totally free, and you can find it by going to xfactorhypnosis.com/transcend. And that's just for your listeners. So those are the two main ways. I have a YouTube channel and all that stuff. It's all available on my main site. As far as final words, you are more than you think you are. I'm just going to leave it at that.
As we wrap up today, it's been an insightful conversation. I really want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Joshua, for sharing your vulnerability, your journey, the wisdom, and your insights and expertise. It's been a privilege to delve into such meaningful topics with you and learn from your experiences, and your openness and your valuable insights provided me and hopefully the audience with a deeper understanding and new perspectives. For listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope today's discussion has sparked some inspiration and offered useful advice and perhaps even challenged you to think differently. It's important to remember that the journey of personal and professional growth is continuous, and every small step forward is significant. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from these insights. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and tune in for more engaging conversations with fascinating guests. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep exploring the possibilities within you.